Hello there, welcome to this week's 5x5. It's a pleasure to have you listening, watching as George Ellick and myself, Ali Maxwell, 5 Yards ambassadors, talk all things 5 yards through the sphere of 5 players. We've got a special guest joining us who's going to talk about two players who are going on 5 yards this very week, so you can get them fresh if you like what you hear on Friday's transfer window. We've also got another new player going up that George is going to talk about right at the end. That is EFL flavoured. So it's a really exciting show ahead today. And George, we're off the back of... I'm not going to lie to the listeners and say it was the busiest transfer window we've had, but it was quite an intriguing one. It's great to look back when the windows close at the trades being made, both buys and sells.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd started to get used to seeing the busiest transfer window we've had because obviously 5 yards is fairly new and people are getting involved. But Tuesday saw a bit of a change. We saw a lot of sells, a lot of people freeing up a few funds, looking to shed some of the players they've already got. It's part of the game, you know. You've got to get in and get out when you want to make your profit, and also if you want to buy a new player, but you've got a few quid tied up in another one. I know, Ali, you're one to quite often do this. You dump a bit of the player you're already holding in order to reinvest somewhere else. But we did see a few players very popular indeed. No surprise to see Neto of Wolves proving to be one of those players bought a lot. He's starting to really capture the imagination of the average football fan. I think Wolves fans have known for a while that they've had a bit of a star in the making there. Ivan Toney, unsurprising as well, continuing to do great things, both scoring and assisting goals. One of our favourite things to mention recently has been the fact that he is the top assister and the top goal scorer in the Championship. Not many players who managed to do both in the same league. Koundé and Malen, another two players we've seen a fair bit of action for in the past, also again proving popular on Tuesday. But I have a feeling it's going to be a busy one on Friday. You know, a few funds have been made available, a few sells, a few people looking over the last couple of days. Fingers crossed we can shed some light on some value in the next half an hour or so.
Everyone who listened last week and heard me going back and forth on Robert Lewandowski and just trying something out from a 5 yards perspective with someone who I think will get me a lot of PP in the Champions League. I went for the wrong big fish, didn't I? Because Tuesday night, Kylian Mbappe, the most expensive player on 5 yards by a significant margin, repaid his owners already over 1% of his total value, 1.3% specifically in one night's work, 2.6 million in performance pay because of 3 goals and a win that he started in, of course, for PSG. An incredible return from a magnificent player. And I think it's fascinating to me. The thought of getting involved with Mbappe myself is just too terrifying because of his price. But you could also say, based on what he might do in the next 10 years, that it could look like great value. There is a scout competition ongoing at the moment as well. It's not too late to get involved for February and try and be a late runner. We got Harry Smith at the top of the leaderboard as we record. It's really easy to do. You write scout reports, you rate players, you write down any detail that you want, but really you're recommending whether they are a buy, a sell or a hold at the current price. And if you come top of the leaderboard, you'll get £10 million in 5 yards currency as a prize, and some 5 million if you come second, 2.5 million if you come third, and 1 million between fourth and 10th. So if you want some extra funds, some bonus funds, do get involved with our scouting competition. Head to 5 yards to check it out. Right, we're going to get into our 5 players now, starting with our special guest. David Cartlidge joins us as our special guest on this week's 5x5. Now, David works for ESPN on their football coverage and some American sports as well. He's also involved with Scouted Football, writes for the Scouted Football handbooks, amazing profiles, and has something in their handbook that's coming out soon, which, of course, on 5x5 we are getting immediately. We are hoovering up and we're adding various names to our own database. In fact, David, I'm thrilled that you've joined me because your pinned tweet on Twitter is an article that you wrote at the start of the year about breakthrough young talent for 2021. So obviously football, but specifically young players and young talent. This is something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first started getting into football writing, my immediate niche was always going to be leaning towards young players. I always found the process of them coming through fascinating, and I don't think there's anything more nourishing than when you have followed a player, perhaps when he was at youth levels, and then you see him playing for his country later on, maybe getting a big move. And that's always really, really nice to see. It's like really, really enriching to see. And it's much better than seeing, I don't know, like some world record transfer fee broken for some big star. It's great to see somebody just come up from those humble beginnings.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that is kind of what 5 Yards is all about as well, is backing yourself, your eye for talent, scouting, etc. So you're going to tell us about two players who actually are going up on 5 Yards this week. They are making their debut, I guess, on 5 Yards transfer market ahead of the Friday transfer window. One of them is a centre-back at Barcelona called Ronald Araujo. Tell me about this kid. What do we need to know about him?
Yeah, absolutely. Barcelona's defense, it's aging so much. I would say, that their main man Gerard Piqué. We record this just after he's had his viral moment.
He's a meme. He's a meme.
Yeah. He's become a meme now. So yeah, Barcelona's in a tricky situation, I think, all across the field. But centre back is one of those areas. I think that they are particularly short in. So it's given a chance to some young talent, and Ronald Araujo has been one of those players to come through. He's not a La Masia graduate. They brought him over from Uruguay a few years ago. He was at Rentistas for a little bit, his youth career. He was at Boston River as well, and then he came over to Barcelona. As they like to do with a lot of their talent, they like to give them a run through in the B team. He spent a bit of time in there, and since Ronald Koeman's come in, he's identified him as a centre back that he can trust because of. I think he really, really fits the mould of what you'd expect the classic Barcelona centre back to be.
So he has been getting sort of increased game time this season in La Liga. I had my eye last night to see if he might start in the Champions League. Was that because of Piqué's return, or has there been a fitness issue? Just talk me through his sort of game time in this Barcelona side so far.
Yeah, absolutely. He's made 12 appearances this season so far, scored 1 goal. In the Liga, that is, and he definitely would have played last night 100%, but it was just some late fitness issues there, and I think they looked at that game, let's call upon experience, even though it was even though Piqué had his own injury issues as well. I think it was decided that his experience was best to go with in this game. Completely understandable. Araujo still finding his way despite looking very, very composed. He's still only 21 years old, but I think next season you'll probably see an even further increase in his game time. He looks I think you look at Barcelona's season, I would say it's been a disappointment, but Araujo, I'd probably say, is, along with another young player, Pedri, probably is one of the stars of the campaign in terms to break out.
Give me a little bit of a scouting report on this player. You've said classic Barca centre-back. I think I know what you're talking about, but just run me through his game.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got a good stature. He's quite tall, but he's also, very, very physical, strong. But number one, he's very, very composed on the ball. Shifting out of that back line, he's got a good passing range, but mainly he can run with the ball as well. He can just stride out of defence, very much a la Piqué. You can imagine that he's had a lot of first team experience in terms of training, going with Piqué and modelling his game. And you see a lot of these young centre backs nowadays. They do look to Piqué. He's their age now. They've been watching him when they've been growing up, and you can clearly see that Araujo has been, since he came over to Barcelona, modelling his game on Piqué, and he plays very much with that style. I'm always impressed when a young player just has bounds of confidence, and he he has exactly that. The way that he comes out of defence with the ball at his feet, he's not fazed by anything. He's happy to join in with play, build it, help up from the back.
So he's taken to this sort of early game time pretty well at Barca. Whether or not we see him in that second leg against PSG is kind of an interesting one. I part of me thinks Piqué was so off the pace that maybe he'd get chucked in. Then again, if you're trying for La Remontada Part 2, do you give a chance to such a young player? But regardless, I mean, there's been a lot of talk Wednesday morning, as we are, about Barca hitting the reset button. Busquets, Piqué, Messi, etc., coming to the end potentially of their incredible career for Barcelona. Do you see this player Araujo being a big part of any reset in the next year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to be a big part of things at Barcelona moving forward. He has to be, quite simply, because you look at their situation financially as well. They're not in a position to spend money on a Koundé, on a Upamecano, who's obviously going to Bayern Munich as well. They're not going to be in the market there, I don't think, for that type of player, because of the situation that they are in. So Araujo, Pedri are players that they're going to move forward with, the younger players. And the signs have been so encouraging as well. It's not necessarily a negative thing. They don't need to look at it and go, oh, we have to settle with playing with these younger players. They are very, very talented, very, very, they can hold their own alongside, I think, some of the best talent in Europe right now.
Well, of course, international football, sadly, no performance pay for that on 5 yards. But it feels notable as well, as you say, a Uruguayan player. What a run of centre-backs they've had from Godin, who is 35 now and probably on his way out. But, of course, Jimenez, who is, 26, and he's got 60 caps for Uruguay. So I'm excited to see those two forming a partnership in the long term.
Yeah, exactly, and some of them have, nearly all of them have played in La Liga as well. So I think it's a great development ground for a young South American centre back, and we've seen them come through time and time again every single year. Argentinian, Brazilian, Uruguayan, they've all come through. I think in Spain there's a good track record there. So I think Araujo is very much in the best place. Don't think he needs a loan necessarily. He just needs to be readied, I think, by Barcelona and shaped.
I hope he's got that Uruguayan spirit as well, the competitive edge that I think we all recognise in other Uruguayan players.
Exactly, I think it's the garra. It's yes. that little bit of grit, that little bit of war. I know, they've always got it about them, and it gives the players a little bit of added edge, and it makes them more exciting to watch. I think even especially when they're centre backs as well.
That's it. Do whatever it takes to win, basically. Maybe Barca need a little bit of that. I'm interested to see that he's going up on 5 yards at 35 million, which is obviously, it's high for a player who's not played that much first team football at the very top level. But for a centre-back of that age, at the club that he's at, and with, it seems like a bit of a pathway, to be honest, maybe more chance at playing more regularly for Barca over the next few years than if he was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So definitely an interesting prospect in 5 yards terms. Barca not having a good season, but looking at the league table in La Liga, will certainly be in the Champions League next year, you'd think. So given that's where, we really want our players to be playing in our squad in 5 yards, could be a really, really interesting option at 35 million. The second player you wanted to talk about just scored his first Premier League goals last week. He's going up on 5 yards at £19 million this week. Fulham's Josh Maja on loan from Bordeaux. What was it about him that made you want to pick him as one of your two to talk about on this week's 5x5?
Yeah, he's a player that I've followed for quite some time now, as listeners can probably tell by my accent. I'm from the northeast, Sunderland, very, very close by to where I'm from. So Josh Maja was somebody that people were always talking about, friends were always talking about when he was in the youth academy, just saying, you've got to watch this kid, he's somebody doing really well. He's somebody who come through in the first team, given the situation at the club at the time. He did come through. He did very, very well. The general feeling is, if he hadn't have gone mid-season like he did to Bordeaux, then Sunderland's promotion, it might have occurred. And things could be very, very different right now, I think, for Sunderland. But alas, he went to France. He's been over there. Certain things have gotten his way. And now he's back in England. Scored those goals on his debut as well. And he could be trying to save another club, I think, from a different set of circumstances. So it's a good start, I think, for him, getting those goals early on. And Fulham certainly need them. And I was really impressed with the way that he did it, especially some of the criticism that he's faced. I noticed apparently in France, I spoke to somebody and they said the criticism in the local press of Maja was apparently his lack of strength, his lack of physical prowess against centre-backs, which caught me as quite interesting, because I always thought he used his body really well when I've watched him play. And so he's coming to England, where he's going to move against physical players, of course. So it'll be interesting to see how he fares. And it's a great start, like I said, for him.
That's the thing, isn't it? We've talked a bit on this show about, the likes of Calvert-Lewin and Watkins and Mikel Antonio in a sense as well. The sort of strikers who have really thrived this season in the Premier League. It's not just technical ability. It's not just, let's say, ball carrying ability or a goal scorer's instinct, but actually upper body strength, if not pure height, that is actually setting these guys apart and meaning that they can play up top on their own as long as they've got players arriving with them and actually hold their own. Do you think that Maja, look, we've only seen basically one or two appearances in a Fulham shirt, do you think Maja's got that ability to play up top on his own? Because of course he's a brilliant goal scorer. I think that's become pretty clear in his young career so far. Do you think he's got that all-round game?
I think he has, and I think at Fulham he's in the perfect place to do that. And you make a great point as well. It's key to have that support around him. And now if you look already, there's just a little bit of a relationship already starting to build between him and the other Nigerian players that are in the Fulham team. And that could be a good little ethic, a good little, mood that they have building there, I think. And that's exactly what you need when you are probably going to be in a relegation battle come at the end of the season. So I think Maja is somebody who can hold the ball up. I think he can do that. He can back in quite well. He's quick as well. And he just needs to start using his body better, just using strength, getting himself between the man and the ball, just holding it up. And then he knows that he's going to have the likes of Lookman coming around him, support, and they'll try and score as well and ease the burden on him and make sure that he's not scoring all the goals. So I definitely think he's got that about him. And of course, those goal scoring instincts, as you say, are fantastic. I noticed on one of his goals against Everton where he just made a little sly run towards the front post, then checked back and went to the back post, and that's when he snuck in and scored. And it's little things like that, I think, what you can see between now and the end of the season, him potentially getting between 10 and 12 goals. It's not ridiculous to think that.
Well, because let's just push this a little bit further. The thing that really makes him stand out, right, is this innate goal scorer's instinct and the finishing ability to go with it. We know what that means. It's movement in the box. It's being in the right place and making the right runs constantly to get those chances. Scrappy goals in the box were kind of a real calling card, certainly at Sunderland. I mean, his finishing ability is unbelievable. And I remember at Sunderland, when he first broke through, we wondered if it might just be an unbelievable hot streak. I guess the jury's still out to a certain extent because he didn't get much consistent game time with Bordeaux. But when he left, I've dragged up an old tweet actually, when he left Sunderland, that season he had taken 42 shots, half of which had been on target, 21 shots on target, and 15 of them had gone in. So over a third of his of total shots, and 71% of his shots on target were going in. He's an absolute gunman, right?
I think on that season as well, he was creating a lot of his own chances. He was playing up top quite a lot. He didn't really have that much support. That Sunderland team didn't have too many creative players in it either. So it was a case of the ball coming up to him and him having to engineer his own shots, create his own chances, just getting that little bit of half a yard of space so he can open up a shot. So I think he's got that about him as well. So that's completely makes sense what you just said there.
And pathway is a little less clear with Maja. Of course, he's only just joined Fulham and he's only on loan from Bordeaux. Do you know what the details are about his sort of status, I guess, at Bordeaux, why he left in January, why it's just a loan? And do you have any thoughts or your own plans on what you'd like to see happening and what you think might be realistic?
I think Bordeaux probably see it as a chance to put him in the shop window. He's not getting much game time there. He can go to Fulham, get in the team, brilliant start, get his value up for teams who are interested in him. If Fulham don't buy him, because don't forget Fulham have got an option to buy on him as well. They managed to get that. I think it's a win-win for Fulham. They stay up, then they know if it works out that they have a striker there ready to buy. They don't need to dip in the market or scour around. They have got somebody there ready-made. And if they go down as well, they also know, oh, right, we can execute this buy option. And we've got somebody who's done it before down at the low levels of England, outside of the Premiership. So I think they can be quite confident either way, really. And if they decide not to, then okay, it's not an obligatory option. Other teams can look at him. But I think he's got a lot of potential. It's a case of finding the right home for him. If it's not Bordeaux, then maybe a return to England with somebody, if it's not Fulham, is the way to go forward.
He's a really interesting prospect in 5Y terms because that price, 19 million, he's going up at. It feels low to me, I must say. That was my gut instinct. I'm looking at the moment on the site and, he's just turned 22, so he really is very young. As long as he's over his injury that he got at Bordeaux, which it appears that he is, he should have plenty of time to make it. And, he'll be pretty much the lowest striker in that 21 to 25 age bracket in the Premier League on 5 yards, along with Vinicius of Spurs, who's 19 million as well. Carlin Grant, 15 million, but West Brom really do look doomed. So that's why for our scouts, for the analysts who set the prices, this is a fascinating one. Where will he be next season? They can't be sure. Will he be playing in the Premier League? They can't be sure. If you, listening to this, think that there's a good chance that Maja will either keep Fulham up and stay there or get a chance at another Premier League club, then at that price, he's got to be pretty interesting. So, it's good to hear from you, your thoughts on Maja, another player that you really like. Thank you so much to David for joining us. George is back in the hot seat, and you're going to tell us about yet another, feels like we're stacked, the England camp at the moment. Yet another young England starlet.
Callum Hudson-Odoi, 54 million he's up on 5 yards at. And it feels like Hudson-Odoi has already basically had a whole career condensed into about 18 months. He was the starlet who came through at Chelsea, who wasn't getting enough game time. He then got his chance and maybe struggled to have the impact that some had hoped. He was then linked to a move away to Bayern Munich, which didn't materialise. He got his England debut and has kind of fallen maybe out of favour in that regard. And now he's starting to play football again. And it's amazing to think that he is just 20 years of age. He's not 21 until November. And in fairness, he hasn't played a great deal of football for someone that age who has the status he maybe now has in the game. But this is a really interesting time for Callum Hudson-Odoi, because in Frank Lampard we had a manager who seemed to be who seemed happy to place some trust in the young players, but Hudson-Odoi wasn't towards the top of that list in terms of, he wasn't first choice under Lampard. Since Thomas Tuchel's come in, or Tommy Tactics as you like to call him, Ali, he's played much more of a role. If you're looking at the amount of football he's played in the last few weeks, he's played some part in every one of the last 13 games in all competitions. He's started, I think, 5 of the last 7 under Tuchel. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they come up against Atletico Madrid, because you'd expect that Tuchel will play what he sees as his strongest side in that game, and we're going to see if whether or not he's made that right wing back slot his own over Reece James, and that's
what's encouraging is, you say he looks like he's playing a key role in the early part of Tuchel's reign, and it's in a number of different roles as well. He's played in that sort of front three as, I don't know what people are calling it these days, a sort of free striker alongside another striker, but that right wing back position where he'd never really played before, he looks pretty good in as well, certainly against teams who defend in a low block, who Chelsea are heavily favoured against. So it's more encouraging for me, thinking about Hudson-Odoi, that Tuchel has given him a chance in different roles, which makes me think that he really does rate him highly and wants him basically on the pitch wherever he can fit him in.
Yeah, and that's kind of from a 5 yards perspective. The interesting thing to think about here is because normally, if you'd bought someone at 54 million who you were anticipating was going to be playing on the right-hand side of a front three, and they were shuffled back into wing-back, you'd probably be a bit concerned, because what pays PP? It's goals and it's assists. But we're already seeing it in Tuchel's system. I mean, I don't really know what people are calling it. Is it a 3-4-3? Is it it's not like the Conte 3-4-3, but it's certainly 3 at the back, and then 2 very advanced wing-backs with 2 sitting midfielders, and then a forward 3 of sorts, kind of playing almost like 2 inside forwards and a striker, or 2 10s. We're seeing those wing-backs are having a really big and important attacking output, mainly on the left-hand side. Marcus Alonso's come in from the cold and has been probably as much of a goal threat as Timo Werner in the games that he's played. The amount he's getting forward, the amount of shots he's having in the opposition box. We're seeing Reece James getting into far more attacking positions, and the same can be said of Hudson-Odoi himself as well, who, despite playing in a more withdrawn role, it's not necessarily impacting his output, because he's expected to still get in, make late runs into the box, not necessarily go in around the side as much as he's been used to. And we've often seen, I think, him playing on the right hand side of a 3, that his job is to go outside far more often, and now maybe he's tasked with getting into more dangerous positions in the final third from a more inside channel. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily terrible news for Hudson-Odoi backers, and I think the important thing to note here is that his star is rising again. He's a player who's 20 years old, who's going to be playing regularly in the Champions League and the Premier League again. And we couldn't necessarily say that in the summer. If you look at how his price has changed over the last few months, he was valued at £45 million back in August. That then dipped down to £42 million in September, or 42 million in September. That's now gone up steadily since then, up to 54 million. And I think the price hasn't moved enough yet to represent the fact that he's now playing under a manager who seems to really rate him and has absolutely no issues playing him in a number of positions. So I'm not sitting here telling you that Hudson-Odoi is a hard buy, but if this is the calibre and quality and kind of blueprint of player that you're looking to fill your 5-yard squad with, I think there might be a bit of value here. It wouldn't be a big surprise to see Hudson-Odoi rocket up pretty soon if he starts making the headline performances to go alongside the starts.
Yeah, really encouraging start under Tuchel, isn't it? And I suppose I don't know exactly what the bookmakers' probability is of Chelsea making the top four, but it's obviously increased since Tuchel took charge. It's probably around 50% or maybe a little higher. So, that Champions League PP is what we want more than anything. And if you think Chelsea have got a good chance of making the top four, and you think Hudson-Odoi looks like the sort of player that Tuchel really wants to make a key player for this Chelsea side, then he's got to be fairly interesting, I think, at that price, given what some of the those wingers who are considered elite at his age group are generally priced up much higher than this. So definitely one to watch, definitely interesting. I mean, he's so highly rated by anyone that's ever worked with him, basically. Probably more more highly rated than he is by casual fans, I think, and maybe even some Chelsea fans. I think there's a technical ability that he has, which is probably overlooked. If anyone thinks he's just a speed or skill merchant, then they haven't seen a compilation of his crossfield passing, because it's quite a random skill for him to have, but it really does stand out. I
remember when I was when I was watching Oxford against Chelsea Bees in what's now the Papa John's Trophy at Stamford Bridge, and he played that game, and I've never seen somebody so technically advanced compared to everybody else on the pitch. Reece James played that day right back. I don't even remember him playing. He would just get on the ball, and whether it was his passing or his dribbling or his running, he was just so clearly better than everybody else. And hopefully with some game time now and a bit of a settled time at Chelsea, and hopefully in the summer there won't be too much speculation about him leaving, then he should go from strength to strength.
It feels like you can probably say with confidence that he will be playing at the very top of the game for Chelsea or someone else for the next 5 years at least, unless something goes very, very wrong. And if you think he could really reach the top of the game, then it's definitely an interesting price that you flagged up, and a really interesting player. I'm actually going to talk about one of his best mates, Mark Guehi. We hadn't planned this. You told me you're talking about Hudson-Odoi just before we came on air, and I've been planning a little segment on Mark Guehi. There's only a few months between them, both born in the year 2000, both 20 years old at the moment. I think Guehi's a couple of months older, but they will know each other's games inside out, that's for sure. And Guehi is in a different situation to Hudson-Odoi. He's 17 million on 5 yards, and I think this is the time to talk about him as a potential buy for your squad. If you're into long-term investments, this is one for the patient ones among you, I must say. Guehi's already played over 3,000 minutes in the Championship, in what will be an 18-month loan at the end of this season with Swansea. It couldn't have gone any better, basically. As soon as he joined Swansea, it was clear that he was a cut above. He's developed from that moment to being, I think, consensus best young centre-back in the Championship. And that's a good title to have. Ask the likes of John Stones, Ezri Konsa, Harry Maguire, James Tarkowski. These guys have all come through the EFL, the Championship, and at one point or another probably been considered the most talented young defender at that level. And what we've seen consistently is that Premier League clubs will happily take centre-backs from the Championship. I feel like Premier League scouting departments almost feel like centre-backs are lower risk from the Championship than some other competitions, which is kind of interesting. Across Europe, I was looking on Scout and Who Scored earlier. You can't find many other centre-backs under 21 who are playing this many minutes. Certainly not in the top 5 leagues. And I know that's not the Championship, but it's not far off. You've really just got Fofana at Leicester, who's also 20, and who's on the 5 yards at 40 million. And Bastoni of Inter as well, who's got a lot of game time, who I think is 29 million. Badiashile of Monaco too. But that shows that in his age group, in his position, he kind of stands out at the moment. He's playing for a Swansea side on course to set a record for the best defensive record, the fewest goals conceded in the second tier. So he's in a good place, playing left of the back three, even as a right footer. It's been noted how comfortable he is, despite playing on the wrong side, if you will, because he's decent with his left foot, but also just because he's very fluid in possession and he's really comfortable technically. I think the 4 things that stand out, there are lots of scout reports of Guehi on 5 yards. Every single one of them, I think there's 5 or 6, has his potential set between 85 and 87, which denotes basically Champions League level, if not maybe that very, very elite creme de la creme, which I think is really interesting that everyone who's done a report basically has a consensus on Guehi's ceiling, and it is, top level, Champions League level. That's because he's lightning quick. The speed is what stands out with Guehi. We know that probably increasingly as forward players seem to get quicker and quicker at the very top level, recovery speed for a defender, speed on the turn is absolutely crucial, and Guehi has that in abundance. His one-on-one defending is very good. His timing in the challenge, his sort of jockeying, if you will. I was watching some clips earlier. He will go to ground if necessary, but I wouldn't say he's rash in that sense. But also technically, you know, a Swansea centre-back over the last few years, they've put a real onus on developing them technically. You get a lot of touches, and it's not good enough to just tap it sideways. It's not good enough to pass it short into a defensive midfield player. He is tasked with progressing the ball, and he's clearly improved over the last 18 months in that sense. And because of his pace as well, because of his technical ability, having come through the Chelsea Academy, he can step into midfield and beyond. His ball carrying for a centre-back is pretty good too. So you can see from Harry Smith, who is currently leading our scout competition, he summed it up by saying he's almost never dribbled past or beaten 1v1. His pace allows him to step up and block passing lanes in the defensive third, and his ball carrying abilities allow Swansea to transition easily on the counter. I think it's fair to flag up a few concerns with Guehi. The first one would be a lack of height. I think he's around 6 foot at the moment, and he looks undersized. He's not dominant in the air. His aerial dual stats are a little low, I think, for a centre-back, ideally. It might seem, and I've wondered in the past if that matters a little less these days for a top-level centre-back, if maybe there are fewer sort of target men types in the Premier League. But actually thinking about it, I think there are. I just think that they're now the full package, right? Players like Calvert-Lewin and even Ollie Watkins to an extent, they might not be target men, but they're so strong physically, their upper body strength, and they're good in the air as well. So you do need to have a good aerial ability to thrive at the very top level. So maybe Guehi hopefully has another inch or two to grow. He needs to prove that he can handle himself aerially at the top level. And I think everyone will be watching quite closely. Next month, he'll be a lock for the England under-21 squad as they play their their under-21 Euros group stage games. And he'll be up against Rafael Leao, I imagine, in that game against Portugal in the group stages. And people will be watching that matchup very, very closely. I think what I would say about his lack of height is, you know, his recovery speed, the technical ability, these are also right up there in terms of key attributes for a centre-back in the modern game. So, you know, there's a lot to love, even if that might be flagged up by certain scouts. The second issue is one of pathway. It's nothing new when we talk about Chelsea youngsters. Of course, at the moment under Tuchel, they're playing 3 at the back, which bodes well, given that he is obviously comfortable in that system. I'd say, as we record now in mid-Feb, it's very difficult to know what Tuchel's plans are for those who are currently playing for Chelsea in these positions. Rudiger, Zuma, Christensen, Thiago Silva at his age, and Azpilicueta there has played a bit as well in the last few weeks. Plus, you've got Tomori and Ampadu out on loan at a higher level than Guehi at the moment, with their own designs on a first-team spot. So that's a clear issue for Guehi. I think the reason why I'd still be encouraged is, I think the time of players getting completely stuck in no man's land at elite clubs in their early 20s is kind of over. I think he only has to look at his peers, those in his age group and the year or two above him, to see a number of guys who have taken control of their own futures and prioritised game time and benefited from that. So I suspect he won't get completely stuck in the Chelsea system. I hope so anyway. And as for his price, at 17 million, I mean, my main feeling here as a buyer, I'm going to be getting involved with him in the Friday window, is that his price, his value will rise significantly over the next few seasons as he starts playing at a high level. Whether or not Swansea are promoted and he plays there again next season on loan, I don't know. But you can see for yourself on the 5 yards transfer market, you can filter by age, by position, by price. And you see that centre-backs between 21 and 25 playing at Premier League level or elsewhere in the top flight across Europe, they're generally worth a lot more than this. So if I think he's going to get there, which I do in the next few years, then I think this is a really good buy. Defenders can get PP as well. Obviously, they're not going to score many goals or get many assists, but 18 centre-backs on 5 yards last year got 3 million or more in performance pay. So in my head, there's a part of this which is like, well, if I think Guehi's going to play at the top level for 5 or 6 years, then that should see him pay back his buy price of 17 million. But also, of course, I think it's likely that his price will rise significantly over the next few years. So there's a few reasons why I want to get involved with him, but I would say that, you know, I'm generally a pretty long-term player. I like to think I show quite a lot of patience as a 5 yards player. Maybe that can be questioned at times, but this is definitely a long-term position. And if you agree with me, if you like the look of Guehi, you will have to be willing to be patient and possibly even be disappointed come the summer if it looks like his pathway is a bit blocked. Things might get a bit frustrating. But a player, George, that, as you can tell, I feel quite strongly about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm amazed you could speak that long without drawing breath. But it was, I mean, interesting to note that you and I spoke to Conor Harrahan on the Not the Top 20 podcast on Monday. It was great to have him on, and I asked him, because he came, he's been playing at Villa, where you've got Tyrone Mings, who's broken his way into the England setup, and you've got Ezri Konsa, who is set to if Portugal don't get there first. And I said, how does Mark Guehi, Ben Cabango, the other young Swansea centre-back, how do they compare? And he was pretty glowing in his reference and actually singled out Guehi as being kind of the one out of the two that he was really impressed with. So certainly shows that a guy who's played with some pretty decent players, including the best player that England have ever had in Jack Grealish, he knows a talent, and he was pretty excited by what he's seen from the Chelsea loanee. So
yeah,
yes,
well, I'm excited.
I agree with you, Ali.
From an England fan point of view, I can't wait for the under-21 Euros next month. I think Guehi is the most sort of established of the centre-backs in that pool. Hopefully, if they go well, there'll be more and more buzz about Guehi as people start to see him play more and more who maybe don't follow the Championship as closely. I mean, Swansea fans can't believe that he's playing for them. Every single game, he makes a recovery tackle or a run upfield or plays a good pass. He's just got so many different parts to his game. And I think it's hard to predict centre-backs at this age and say definitively they will play for England. They will be a key part of an England team for a long time to come. But, looking at people in his age pool at the moment, you've got the likes of Harwood Bellis, maybe Latibaudière, who's also at Swansea, but is a little behind in his development. I mean, Guehi would be the one that I would pick right now if you said to me, which English centre-back under the age of 21 are you most confident will get 30 England caps. So, I'm pretty excited about this. George, another thing I'm excited about is the list of new players going up on 5 yards this week. We've already heard about Araujo. We've heard about Josh Maja, of course. And in the EFL, one of our favourite young players is going up as well. One of a lovely bunch of players heading up on site this week.
Yeah, there's a few that I like. I'll try not to knock over my mic again for anyone who's wondering what that bump was. Taylor Richards is a player who's on loan from Brighton at Doncaster, who's showing pretty quickly that he's making a bit of a mockery of League One. £14 million does probably reflect that. Ronan Curtis wouldn't have thought he'd still be playing League One football a year ago. At Pompey, he's going up at 10 million. Scott Fraser, who's a lovely player at MK Dons, 5 million probably reflects that he is unlikely to ever get to the top level, but he could comfortably be scoring goals and assisting goals in the Championship next season for somebody, although MK Dons would be loath to let him go. But I'm going to be talking about Callum Styles, who'll be going up on Friday at 17 million. Barnsley's centre midfielder switched to left wing back, and he is a lovely player, and he is also a youngster called Callum. He's 21 next month, so a little bit older than Callum Hudson-Odoi, and came to Barnsley a couple of years ago, but only really broke into their first team in the summer. I think he was someone who's the coronavirus break, let's say, probably did him some good, where he came into the side at a time where they really needed him. He scored a crucial goal against Brentford on closing day in order to help save Barnsley, and he is just a player who is fantastic to watch. He's technically very, very gifted, as you can see by the fact he's a centre midfielder, but also has the athleticism and the energy to get up and down that left flank, and that is what I think makes him intriguing, because he scores goals. He scored 3 Championship goals this season. He's got 2 assists as well. But I think realistically, when you're looking at this, when you're looking at a player at 17 million, which on my first viewing seemed quite toppy to me, a little bit high, you've got to think, if you were a Premier League side, would you be interested in Callum Styles? And the overwhelming answer has to be yes, because not only can he play in 2 positions, there aren't many players who can do this. There aren't many players who can get up the flank as Styles does, who is left-footed, who has the technical quality to go alongside the athleticism. And if he were to get a move up to the Premier League, then at 20 years old, with a decade's worth of football ahead of him, this 17 million could seem pretty low. I'm not going to buy yet. I'm still wary that we've only seen kind of 7 or 8 months worth of really good Championship football. But playing under Valerian Ismail at Barnsley, he couldn't really be at a better place. And the way that they play football as well, looking to play on the front foot, looking to hassle the opposition, press very high, shows that he has that off the ball side of his game that would appeal to some of the top managers around. So yeah, I'm not sitting here being like, this is wrong, you've got to get on Callum Styles. But I am saying that at 17 million, there's a player here who's got a very, very good chance of in 3 or 4 years being a lot higher than that, having already racked up a bit of PP.
I think the club that he plays at is fascinating here as well, because Barnsley are, to my eyes anyway, and I'm not saying that they will have the success of Brentford, but they strike me a little bit of Brentford circa 4 or 5 years ago, that they're starting a policy that has seen a lot of young players bought and developed. They play a style of play that I think I think it elevates their players. Basically, they play a really high intensity game, and I think their players are in the shop window, maybe more so than any other team in the middle part of the Championship, let's say. So I also think they're in a position at the moment, and the reason I reference Brentford is, you remember a few years ago, Brentford were often selling their players to other clubs in the Championship, richer clubs, at a price that looked a little low, but then they got themselves into a position where they could start demanding the proper fees, your 20-25 million pounds for the likes of Watkins. I think that Barnsley are in that first stage where they probably still won't be able to command really, really high fees, and that might mean that Styles could be picked off by a team this summer, whether that's low part of the Premier League, or maybe one of the richer Championship clubs. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, he's one of a number of players going up on the platform, on the site this week. Rafael Guerrero of Dortmund, lovely player, going up at 19 million as well. We've mentioned a couple of them here, as have you. Tyler Roberts of Leeds. I know that the Leeds fans voted on that one, and he was the overwhelming winner. And Danny Loader's an interesting one as well, formerly of Reading, now at Porto. £16 million. Loader, big player for England youth teams for the last few years, who maybe has dropped off a few radars, but I wouldn't be surprised if, a bit like Josh Maguire, he drops very much back on our radars at some point soon. So make sure that you are locked to the 5 Yards Twitter account. You can see a full list of the players. That's where you'll find out about price changes as well, about any sort of competitions that we're running. So much going on 5 Yards at the moment, and we're so glad that you guys listening and watching this are buying into it, are engaging with it. Please send us over any questions on Twitter, any questions you have about players themselves that we've spoken about, or just 5 Yards questions. We want the conversation to be flowing throughout the week. We want it to peak around the transfer windows, of course, on Tuesday and Friday, and we're looking forward to the window opening at 9 a.m. on Friday. See you there, guys. Thanks for tuning in to this week's 5x5. We'll be back again next week.